Hi, good evening. I'm Rabbi Weinblatt, and I want to speak to you tonight about the important issues that are affecting our nation. And in fact, at a time when we as a nation, and indeed the entire world, are reeling from and striving to deal with the devastating and all-encompassing impact of the coronavirus, something which has severely altered and changed our daily routine and habits, our family life, our economy, our way of life, not to mention, of course, the health and well-being of so many, leading to an extended period of isolation, which in turn has caused heightened anxiety and stress. As if dealing with all of this were not enough, our nation is now in the midst of civil unrest and protests, the likes of which we haven't seen in decades, as a result of the heartless murder of George Floyd by a Minneapolis police officer. That one act was a turning point because it was perceived not as an isolated incident, but viewed in the context of the recent murders of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, and other instances, all too many, when young African Americans have had their lives taken not by courts of law and not with the benefit of counsel or legal representation, and sometimes by the very individuals who are supposed to protect them. This one act set off a spark, inflaming embers that have been accumulating for years, if not longer. It stirred outrage because it was seen as a symbolic of a pattern of racism, indifference, and inappropriate behavior that's been tolerated for way too long. George Floyd, like Eric Garner, pleaded for his life as a police officer exerted force on his neck. He pleaded for mercy and said, "I can't breathe." Words that in a moment have now captured a movement and galvanized and awakened an outpouring, rejecting the lethargy of lack of awareness that has allowed racism to fester in our society. And so as I was davening, as I was praying this past week, I thought of all the times that our prayers talk about breath and about breathing. We sing Kol HaNeshama Tehallel from the book of Psalms. At the end of the introductory prayers, let every soul, let every breath praise you, O God. At the start of the Shachrit service, our morning service, we recite Nishmat Kol Chai Tevarech Et Shimcha. The breath of all that lives praises you, Lord God. And in the very beginning of our morning service, every day we affirm Neshama Shenatata Bi Tohorahi. The soul, the breath which you, my God, have given me is pure. So I had a heightened consciousness this past week during services of all the references in our prayers to breath and to breathing, the neshama, which is used in Hebrew to express life, living beings, and is the same word for soul. For after all, human life itself and the story of humanity is initiated in the creation story in the book of Genesis, when God breathes breath itself into the nostrils of Adam. And with that breath of life, Adam became a living being, a human being endowed with a soul, with neshama, with breath. Our mystics tell us that God's divine name, the Shem HaMifurash, the name that cannot be pronounced, the essence of God's holy presence is breath itself. So in light of these passages, watching the video of the life force being extinguished is deeply disturbing and distressing. And so when people ask at demonstrations, what's his name? It's a cry to be recognized. It reminds me of Martin Luther King's final march in Memphis, leading sanitation workers with marchers carrying signs and placards that proclaimed, "I am a man." It's a cry for dignity, a cry of desperation. And all of us need to understand that is what is meant when people say, Black Lives Matter. It's not binary. No one should feel threatened by such a slogan. No one should see it as a threat or statement that other lives don't matter. Obviously, of course, everyone's life matters. But this is a desperate call, an appeal to the conscience of all good people. It's a rejection of callous indifference. It's the response to too many instances when actions taken seem to assume that Black people do not matter, that they are expendable, that they somehow are less worthy of basic human rights, including the right to breathe. And I hasten to add, I'm making a distinction here, a serious one, an important one. I'm talking about the concept, about the principle, not the organization which has made problematic anti-Semitic statements and taken anti-Israel positions. So despite this, we can embrace the affirmation that everyone, that all of God's children are created equally, B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. The very Bible we read from, the rabbis and our sages, our Jewish tradition, attests that all of God's children are created equally, B'Tselem Elohim. And our Jewish tradition attests over and over the sanctity of every human life, the equality and brotherhood of all, the value of treating all with dignity, and the imperative to pursue justice, Tzedek. This is why every major national Jewish organization and every major national and local Jewish organization, guided by these precepts, recognize that Judaism and our Jewish tradition compels us to speak out. It's why the organized Jewish community has been unanimous in expressing outrage at the death of George Floyd and solidarity with those who protest injustice. The point is, when people are in pain, we must hear their cry, and we must feel and seek to understand their pain and the source of that pain, and we must have compassion for those who are suffering. And when they call out and they ask at marches and rallies, "What's his name?" I'm reminded of the powerful and beautiful poem by the Israeli poet Zelda, "L'chol ish yesh shem," every person has a name, frequently read at Israeli memorial ceremonies commemorating the Holocaust or fallen victims. Everyone has a name. L'chol ish yesh shem. And it goes like this. Everyone has a name given to him by God and given to him by his parents. And it concludes, given to him by the sea and given to him by his death. I wrote last week to my friend Anthony Brown, the representative of Maryland's 4th District in the U.S. House of Representatives. And I wrote to him, "Dear Anthony, I'm sad, and I just want to reach out to you. I'm so upset by what happened to George Floyd and other victims of systemic racism in our country. I would love to chat and see if there's anything we can do together to turn the tide and help our country realize, in the words of our prayer book, we have not come into being to hate or to destroy, but to praise, to labor, and to love. Best wishes, your friend, Rabbi Stuart Weinblatt." And here's the heartfelt note that I got back from him. "Stuart, thank you for your email. I too am sad and distressed. I often fear for my sons, but mostly for my son Jonathan, who we adopted as an infant. He's now 20 years old and is a good-natured, lovable young man. He's smart, but often has difficulty expressing himself clearly. He can get frustrated, which sometimes sounds and seems confrontational. And so I'm always concerned when he leaves the house, and I have been since he turned 16. He is 5'11". He's a big guy. He doesn't fuss about his appearance, and nor should he need to. I fearfully imagine him being stopped by police for a not so obvious reason. That image is now horrifically overlaid by another image of a police officer with his knee on Jonathan's neck, as he is lying face down on the ground. It brings me to tears, hearing George Floyd and seeing my son Jonathan calling for his mother as the last words of his life. I'm angry and sad, Anthony. This is a reality most of us do not know, have not, and do not experience, and do not have to deal with. But, my friends, an entire portion of our population, for them, this is their reality every day. And so if we're ever to move forward as a nation and as a society, if we're to heal the divisions that polarize and alienate us from one another, we must strive to understand the anxiety and the fear that parents of Black children feel, the agony and worry that Congressman Brown so eloquently describes in his note to me. And so if the events of the last 2 weeks cause us to do what we call a din v'cheshbon, an accounting of the soul, to look inside ourselves and to take a deep, honest look at ourselves and at our society, to make honest and tough decisions, to think about what we do and consider the changes we need to make, then we can hope that maybe, just maybe, some good will come out of all of this. Our nation has faced similar challenges and divisions in the past, and we've been able to prevail, persevere, and rise above it. And I have faith in the goodness of the American people to do the right thing. When I went on a civil rights mission to the Deep South a year ago, I witnessed the places where the struggle for civil rights was fought. I saw the memorial to the victims of lynching and saw churches that were bombed. We've come a long way and have made tremendous strides, but we still have a long way to go. This is a time that calls out for leadership. Leadership that will unite us, that will inspire and uplift us, that will remind us of the best that is in each of us, of the message of America and its promise of justice and equality for all. And that is part of why I speak about this tonight. As disturbing as the deaths of the victims across the country are, I found the incident that occurred a few days earlier in Central Park to be in its own way very disturbing as well. It was indicative of the kind of subtle racism all too prevalent in our society. When a white woman called 911 and complained that a black man was attacking her, knowing it wasn't true. Although she was not threatened or in any danger, she had confidence that her word would be taken against the Harvard-educated birdwatcher who was merely and politely asking her to leash her dog. She knew the assumption would be that she would be protected and presumed to be in the right because she was white and he was black. And that's part of the source of the pent-up frustration over these assumptions and presumptions of guilt because of the color of one's skin that people are demonstrating against. Demonstrating, protesting, calling people to look inward, asking for reforms. All of this is justified and what we need to do at this time. But let us proceed with good judgment and not substitute hasty, unthought-out, simplistic, superficial slogans, catchy slogans such as defund police as being a meaningful or reasonable or serious policy response. Such platitudes should not take the place of important, necessary reforms, which require hard work. And so we have to proceed. We should proceed with what we call seichel, with common sense, and consider the long-term impact of such actions. There's a stark contrast and difference between expressing discontent, of using our constitutional rights to protest and to express grievances, and vandalism, hooliganism, and looting. Those who are rioting, looting, and inciting violence are using the situation as a backdrop and as a pretext for their own agenda and sometimes for theft itself. Lawlessness and wanton random acts of violence and destruction, which amount to little more than an excuse to steal, are not protests against injustice and have nothing to do with the underlying causes of the issues afflicting our nation, which need to be addressed. Sadly, many of the businesses which were looted, burned, or destroyed are the very same businesses which serve minority communities. And some of the objects of the violence and vandalism were places of business owned by Jews and clearly identifiable Jewish institutions. A member of our congregation had a neighborhood store that was broken into and looted just last week. In Los Angeles, synagogues were defaced with hateful graffiti, with terrible slogans, swastikas, and anti-Israel remarks. And not enough voices have been raised to call attention and to object to these horrific acts as well. Indeed, anytime something like this occurs, there will be those who will take advantage of the situation and use it for anti-Semitic overtones, for which we must ever be vigilant. But we must not let prejudice against Jews deter us from speaking out against injustice. On the Sunday after the killing of George Floyd, I reached out and I spoke to the pastors of the 2 black churches we've had as our guest here at B'nai Tzedek, and subsequently shared with them the message I wrote in my weekly email Igeret message. Reverend John Jenkins of the Glen Arden Church wrote back to me and he said, "My dear brother, Rabbi Stewart, words cannot express my deep appreciation for your support and concern for our community. You have repeatedly demonstrated your heart of love and compassion, And I am grateful beyond words. Thank you so very much, your friend, John. And so those are the kinds of acts of kindness that we need to express, and friendship and reaching out, as well as thinking about what needs to be done. Our work is cut out for us. There's much that needs to be done. And as Pirkei Avot, the sayings of the fathers, the sayings of the sages, teaches and implores us. It says, Lo alecha ligmor ha'avodah hamalacha. You are not obligated or expected to complete the task. It is not incumbent upon you to complete the task, and not alone. But then it goes on to say, neither are you free to desist from it. So, my friends, let us each do our part. Let us do what we can to bring justice and tolerance and equality to our country, to our nation. For surely we can rise up and bring out the best in each of us. That's our role and responsibility as Jews, to be an or lagoyim, a light unto the nations. Let the teachings of our heritage shine at the path for us, and let us work together. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for sharing this message. Good night.